As we go on air tonight, reports from Turkey that the military are on the street and bridges over the Bosphorus have been closed. Fighter jets have been filmed over Ankara. Could this be a military coup against President Erdogan?
It seems elements of the military are indeed trying to seize power. Some police and security units remain loyal to President Erdogan, and there are reports of clashes between them.
And in France, another appalling tragedy as 84 people are mown down on the seafront in Nice.
Le camion est arrivé, il a foncé pour tout le monde. Sur tout le monde. Pas de sécurité. Les pompiers, ils ont mis 25 minutes de lumière à arriver.
Mais c'est un camion qui a foncé.
French authorities say that the suspect, despite having a criminal history, had no known links to radical organisations. Good evening. About 90 minutes ago, we began to hear reports of unexpected and unexplained military action in Turkey. Fighter jets were filmed flying low over the city of Ankara, and the sound of gunfire was reported. Shortly afterwards, the two main bridges in the capital, Istanbul, were closed by security forces, again with no explanation. The Turkish Prime Minister, Ahmet Yildirim, stated that an attempted military uprising was underway, adding that it would not be successful. President Erdogan has just been speaking and has said that those attempting to mount a coup will pay a heavy price. I'm here with Newsnight's diplomatic editor, Mark Urban. In a moment, we'll be joined by Ibrahim Dugas, the director of the Centre for Turkish Studies. But first, our correspondent in Istanbul is Katie Watson. Katie, what's the very latest?
Well, this has all been taking place in the last half, and the events really are still pretty muddy. Now, what we first heard was that the bridges in Istanbul were closed off. There are soldiers on both sides of the bridges, and there's been in Ankara and in Istanbul. Now there's been the PM Yildirim has said that this is a partial takeover, that it's not really a coup, but we've had a statement from the military saying this is a takeover, and they've done it to restore democratic order, to maintain human rights, and then they will be maintaining international agreements. So on the part of the military, they say this is very much a complete takeover. Now, we've just had President Erdogan on an iPhone. He's not actually in Ankara, in Istanbul. He's been on the local television talking about the fact that they won't tolerate this threat to democracy, and calling people to come out and protest. So that is just on an iPhone. That's what we've heard. At the moment, the situation is still very unclear. Two sides telling different stories, but what it does look like certainly is that the military is on the streets, and we can hear it in the skies too.
Katie Adams, many thanks. Mark Urban, Newsnight's diplomatic editor, is with me in the studio. A little context, Mark, a little background.
Well, look, let's piece together what's happened tonight, and we can see some pictures, hopefully, as we talk through this. The first real sign that something was up was when the Bosphorus bridges were closed, these key thoroughfares across that waterway in Istanbul. Troops were seen, in fact, we can see them here holding positions and stopping people from crossing. Tanks and other armoured vehicles then went into the centre of Istanbul and to key buildings, key headquarters in Ankara, the capital. A little bit later on, it became apparent that some police were resisting, and also some elements of military intelligence. And some pictures were shown of helicopters firing apparently at military intelligence headquarters. I think what you can tell from all this is that this is a large-scale military operation supported by broad elements of the armed forces. We know they've arrested the army chief. We know they've attacked the military intelligence chief's office. So the bosses are not behind this. It's the colonels and brigadiers, the people who typically do coups in so many situations in the past. They're doing this, but it's very widespread. And the fact that President Erdogan, in trying to speak tonight, has come up through a shaky FaceTime connection suggests who has got the upper hand at the moment. But he may, of course, manage to rally loyalist forces outside Ankara and Istanbul.
Which raises the prospect not so much of a coup d'etat, but of a civil war in the making.
Well, there are reports that as well as the incident with the helicopters that I've referred to this evening, that there have been other incidents tonight of the police who are thought to be certainly elements of them loyal to Prime Minister Yildirim and President Erdogan, resisting. There being gunfire, the police being roughly treated by the military. So there's already been a certain amount of force used, but the military are now claiming on certain Turkish state media that they are in control, but we've yet to see a real face or faces to this coup.
As you speak, I'm hearing that the state broadcaster has indeed been taken over by the military. Ibrahim Dugas, you are the director of the Centre for Turkish Studies, and so it's fair to say a rather close-up watcher of the region than most of us. And because of that, I'd like to start by asking you how surprised you are by tonight's event.
I mean, there has been quite a bit of talk on the streets of Turkey amongst the political commentators that to come up with a change in Turkey, the only way would be military to come into power or military to take over the government and so on. So quite a few people won't be surprised much. But many in Turkey will be very much surprised because President Erdogan is known to be grasping all the power in Turkey, and he had extremely good working relationships with the military personnel. But that's, again, as Mark put it, it's very much the top sort of commanders, chief of staff, head of intelligence, head of police forces. They've all been very loyal and close to President Erdogan. But there has always been a case of infiltration into military and police and intelligence through Gülenist forces, Gülenist movements, loyalists within the country. Some on government side are claiming that this is not going to end up with a military coup, but it will be pretty much a revolt by those who are loyal to Gülenists.
And what are they revolting about? What is their grievance?
I mean, whatever they put on the statements is about the direction that the country has been taken to by President Erdogan and his close circle.
This means increasingly autocratic.
Autocratic and undermining democracy in the country. Human rights is no longer a strong. And it's always been a problem in Turkey, but things have relatively changed between 2004 and 2008. Then President Erdogan became very much autocratic, very difficult in terms of its relations with its own population, with its own sort of neighbours. That's all been a very negative change for the people in the country.
Just one other option I think we should consider here. That it could be followers of this cleric, an Islamist cleric, Fethullah Gulen, who've done this, and that seems to be the assumption of the people around President Erdogan. But it could also be so-called Kemalists, people loyal to the Ataturk vision of a secular Turkey who feel that Erdogan has got too powerful and that they've got to step in to save Turkey's secular values. I have to say, if I had to put money on one other option, it is looking more like Kemalists tonight.
So forces of liberalism rather than forces of religion?
Well, secularism, I think I would say, in the Turkish model, the military secularism.
I just want to take a moment now to say that the Foreign Office has advised that any British people in Turkey should stay away from public places. So if you do have friends or family there and you're making contact with them and they're not hearing official guidance from the Foreign Office, that you can provide them with it. They're saying that the British people in Turkey should stay out of public places. What happens next?
I mean, it's difficult to judge right now, I would say, because President Erdogan has taken country from a very bad position, I would say, to a good position, then to a worst situation now. I mean, his alleged support to those Islamist terrorists in the region, his crackdown on Kurdish people and Kurdish forces, almost ethnic cleansing town centers in the southeast of Turkey, the re-emergence of clashes between Kurdish fighters and the Turkish military have all brought the country to a standstill in a way. The economy began to do really bad, and it is very wise to say this could be a coalition of Kemalists and Gülenists and many other forces who were unhappy with the direction of the country.
Ibrahim Dugas, Mark Urban, many thanks to you both. Now, for the third time in 18 months, France reels from the shock of mass murder. Social media is awash with increasingly desperate relatives seeking news of missing family members, and unlike in the two previous attacks on France, many children are known to be among the 84 dead. President Hollande has described it as a terrorist attack, adding that the whole of France was under an Islamist terrorist threat. And while no group has claimed responsibility for the atrocity perpetrated by a lone man with no known history of radicalisation, few would argue with either description. We begin tonight's report with some eyewitness accounts of last night's horror.
It is not just in the dreadful scenes of carnage that the horror of this attack lies, but in the pictures taken moments before. Families, friends and strangers enjoying the warmth of a July evening and the community of a national holiday.
J'écoutais le groupe en fait quand il y a eu en fait un mouvement de foule. Sur le coup, je pensais que c'était relatif en fait à la musique qu'on écoutait parce que c'est du rock. Je pensais que ça dansait, que ça poussait un petit peu. Et j'ai fini par m'apercevoir que c'était pas le cas quand j'ai entendu les gens crier, etc. Et que j'ai vu les musiciens en fait quitter la scène de manière assez abrupte. Et là, je me suis dit un truc qui va pas.
Au moment, on comprend pas. On voit les gens courir, du coup, on suit. On est comme des moutons. On voit la foule. On peut pas savoir ce qui se passe.
From the corner of my eye, I saw this truck just speeding towards us, and we literally had like maybe 1 or 2 seconds to get out of the way, and I just managed to push both me and my wife on the pavement.
I started to yell at the driver. He was wearing a uniform, I think blue uniform, so just what I thought that he just lost control of the truck, and it was an accident.
Délibérément, il n'y a pas de perte de contrôle, hein. C'était vraiment délibéré. Il zigzaguait en fait, pour choper le maximum de personnes. Et il a changé son moment quoi.
Il visait particulièrement un manège d'enfants. Le premier, voilà.
Il visait avec son arme.
Voilà. Non, avec le camion. Le camion. Oui, un manège d'enfants. C'est pour ça qu'il y avait beaucoup d'enfants qui étaient blessés, vraiment des tout petits enfants.
Il y avait des gens qui tombaient par terre et tout partout. Des enfants, des vieux et tout. Mais après, à ce moment-là, tu
penses à courir.
Voilà, tu cours, simplement.
J'avoue qu'on a eu des personnes qui sont tombées devant nous par terre et que
voilà,
moi personnellement j'ai géré ma femme et ma fille, mais je les ai poussés vers... on s'enfuyait quoi, on s'est enfui.
Ah ouais, on n'a pas relevé les gens qui
pu,
tombaient,
on se protège quoi.
Un camion est arrivé, il a foncé sur tout le monde, sur tout le monde. Pas de sécurité, les pompiers, ils ont mis 25 minutes de lumière à arriver.
Mais c'est un camion qui a foncé dessus.
Qui a foncé, on a fait ça. Le camion,
ici, ça s'est passé.
Là, j'ai un
Et ça a tiré aussi.
Après, ils ont tiré tout.
Ils ont tiré?
Ah oui, j'en ai pas amputé.
I just took out my cell phone and I turned on my video. And I was filming the shooting until they killed him and they came close to him to be sure that he's killed. I saw his head getting out of the window of the truck. I think they thought maybe the truck has a bomb or something, or maybe he is a suicide guy and he could explode himself. So at that moment I started to run with the people.
Basically, just people, bodies everywhere, and people were trying to save their loved ones. There's a lot of shouting.
Oh merde!
Just too much going on for the police to handle it. You know, there was for 2 kilometers. It was just a mess. It was a terrifying scene. Terrifying scene.
Tonight there's a vigil going on in Nice to remember the many who have died. We can see live pictures of it now. And earlier this evening I spoke over Skype to Alain Richard, France's former defence minister and now a socialist senator, the current party of government.
We have been considering cancelling or suppressing some events, but you know, for the French public and the tourists too, the visitors too, these fireworks and games and public events for the National Bastille Day, it would be a trauma to suppress them. So the risk was taken, and that kind of that method of attack was. It had been envisaged, but it wasn't really a priority in the prevention measures.
Why do you think France has fallen victim to attacks of this nature on such a scale and with a frequency that we don't see anywhere else in Europe?
In a way, the IS is certainly targeting France specifically for different political or ideological reasons. But then we have clearly at least two kinds of attacks. The attacks of Paris and Saint-Denis last November were planned, were really prepared from the center of IS. And the people who executed the attacks were under the orders of IS, whereas the criminal who realized the attack last night was an individual. Of course, we don't know yet, but it's very, very likely that it will appear that he was following the appeal of IS, but he was not under their, hierarchy.
In the context of your own lifetime, Monsieur, how divided is your country at the moment?
I am all the more cautious to answer this question. That my personal analysis is that dividing the French societies, and especially between Muslims and the other French people, is certainly the basic strategy of IS. I think if they target France more intensely than other European democratic countries, my bet is that they do so because we have a large Muslim community in this country of between 5 and 6 million inhabitants, and they would consider a victory, a success, if this community was discriminated and opposed by the rest of society. So, of course, it's a challenge for us that the reaction and the counterattack of rule of law should be unanimous and should not divide the French people among themselves.
And joining me now from Nice is Marc-Étienne Lansard, the Front National mayor of Cogolan, a town just along the coast from Nice. Monsieur Lansard, how do you, as a civic leader, respond to an apparent terror attack so close to home?
I'm sorry, the sound is awful.
Let me ask you again. How do you react to last night's event so close to your own region?
You know, it's a really mix of feelings. First of all, it's sadness and compassion. And you know, here in Nice is very shocking. But it's also anger and questions. I know that this moment is a special moment where you have to respect the deaf and you have to be far away from controversy, but it doesn't destroy the questions and why it happens again. It's the third time in France, and our government is explaining that we are in war, but who is leading the war? What is done? What are the means to make this war? And when you see here that one person is making that, what will be the future?
You just heard, I hope, the former Defence Minister Alain Richard suggest that Islamic State want to see more division in France and particularly would like to see French Muslims discriminated against more. Do you agree with him?
I'm sorry, but the sound is really too bad for answering you. Can you please? I'm sorry.
I'll have one more attempt. My apologies to you, monsieur. Alain Richard, the former defence minister, suggests that Islamic State want to see French Muslims discriminated against more. Do you agree with his analysis?
You know, this is not the question that I'm asking. You know, my question is how we're going to stop those things. I'm sorry that I don't think it's really decent to talk about this, because this is not the main question. The main question is what we're going to do to stop those, what we have in England. I think it's Muslim Brotherhood that here is tolerated. I mean, we have Salafist mosques that still are open. We don't do anything to stop this, and for sure all the Muslims are not involved in those things. How can you think something like this? For sure. But the problem is what we do to fight against Salafism, what we do to destroy this Salafism, to destroy it, like they want to destroy our freedom, our values, and in this special day for us.
I understand your answer, although the question really was about the response politically in France to people not perhaps responsible for the spread of Salafism or Wahhabism. Do you think French Muslims feel less safe now because not only are they at the risk of being victim to terror attacks, they're also in some quarters perhaps at risk of being blamed for them? I think the technology has defeated us. Marc-Etienne Lansard, many thanks indeed for your time and your best efforts this evening. So, who was Mohamed Laouedj Boulel, and will his background provide any clues about what led him to drive a rented truck into a 30,000-strong crowd of people celebrating Bastille Day? Secunda Kamani is in Nice and joins me now. Secunda, I gather the father...
Nice the beautiful. Tonight the city grieves, in the aftermath of what appears to be the third major attack on France in 18 months. This is the man believed to be behind it. 31-year-old Mohamed Laouedj Boulel, a Tunisian national who lived in the heart of the city he devastated. His lorry was rented, due to be returned on Wednesday, but around 11 p.m. French time last night, he turned onto Nice's Promenade des Anglais and soon started to drive at people on the street. A number of people are reported to have died when he got to the Volier Plage restaurant. By the time the truck reached the Westminster Hotel, police were apparently firing at it. Finally, it came to stop outside a casino at the junction with the Rue du Congrès, 1¼ miles of devastation. Searches today at Mohamed Laouedj Boulel's flat near Nice's central railway station. We spoke to neighbours about the man who last night killed at least 84.
He had a perverted look which was scary. He wasn't friendly. We'd say hello to him and he wouldn't answer. He'd just look at us, stare. He'd move down, keep going and stare.
Was he religious?
No, he drank alcohol. Religious people don't drink alcohol, at least not normally.
At a press conference this afternoon, France's prosecutor gave new details about the attack and the man behind it.
Mohamed Laouedj was known to the police and justice services for threats, violence and breaking and entering committed between 2010 and 2016. However, he is completely unknown to the intelligence services, both locally and at the national level. He was not the subject of a single file or ever reported for radicalisation.
Police will be hoping that their searches of this small flat, you can still see the debris on the floor from where police presumably kicked the door in from the flat early this morning. They'll be hoping that the searches will reveal the motive behind the awful events of last night. At the moment, authorities believe that the attack has all the hallmarks of being jihadi inspired, but don't have any concrete evidence that that was the case. Other key questions remain too. Did the attacker act alone? Could there be accomplices still on the run? And could more have been done to prevent it? The truck used in the attack was removed from the Promenade des Anglais this afternoon. France is becoming used to horrific violence, but something feels different about this. The use of a truck as a weapon, targeting a smaller city, and the number of families with children who were affected. Tonight across Nice, people came together to honour and remember the victims. Over the next few days, we'll learn more about why they died.
Secunda Kamani reporting. We are going back now to the events in Turkey this evening to see if we can piece together more about the coup apparently going on in the country tonight. I can tell you that the state broadcaster has announced this evening that the military has taken over the country, and we can see those pictures now. A Turkish military statement read on state TRT television says that the military has seized power, citing rising autocratic rule and an increase in terrorism. These are the live shots now from that bridge over the Bosphorus. I'm joined by our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, for the latest on a story that has developed since we last saw you 20 minutes ago, Mark.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's evidence of a broadly supported military coup. They've taken key places, Istanbul airport, the TV station, seized the army headquarters. But we've also seen extraordinary images of President Erdogan appearing on a phone held up by a TV presenter, speaking via FaceTime and essentially saying, "I'm in charge." Now, it would be comic, but he has ordered supporters onto the streets to contest this military coup. And therein lies the potential for large-scale bloodshed. If he's able to go to some part of the country that isn't under the control of this new military junta, for that's what we must assume it is, then he could raise loyalist forces. Conflicting reports about President Erdogan's physical whereabouts, some saying he's got on a plane, others saying he's safe but in Turkey. Unfolding story tonight.
Indeed, and when you mention the prospect of bloodshed, this will depend upon just how many loyalists President Erdogan can mobilise and how quickly.
And there have already, we know, been clashes in the cities with police loyal to the Erdogan government and some of the military. We don't know really anything about possible casualties, but we know there have been incidents where firearms have been used and buildings have been attacked. So there's already the possibility that blood has been spilt, quite a strong possibility, but President Erdogan now seeks to order his supporters to contest this.
And any indication at all of who's at the top of the pyramid, who is essentially the leader?
A fascinating thing. I mean, look, the Nasserite coups in the Middle East in the 50s and 60s, it was all colonels, you know, Gaddafi, Nasser. We know that the very top level of the army chief is under arrest, apparently. The head of military intelligence was also seized. These people are loyal to Erdogan, apparently. So it must be a level or two down, major generals, colonels, people like that. We have to wait to see if a face or a group of faces emerges to claim responsibility for this action.
I'm just hearing that Turkey's European Union minister has instructed or encouraged soldiers to disobey orders. Which orders would that be? That would be the orders from
the coup.
From the leaders.
That would be an
coup.
Erdogan loyalist trying to incite them.
We have on our screens now live shots. These are live shots coming from Turkey of tanks on the streets, suggesting that this engagement is far from over. With me now in the studio are Rula Khalef, the deputy editor of the Financial Times, and Richard Barrett, the former director of counter-terrorism at MI6. And you were both poised to discuss the situation in France with us, but I suspect your expertise extends to Turkey. I know that you were a foreign editor at the FT before being promoted to deputy editor. So give us an idea of how people more familiar with the region perhaps than the average, how surprised they are by events tonight.
I think this is an extraordinary event. 20 years ago, you wouldn't have been surprised by a coup in Turkey. But I think now you expect that Turkey has moved on, not least because one of the main supposed achievements of Erdogan has been to neutralize the army. So I think this is pretty extraordinary, and I think we have to wait. You know, the information is still very confusing. We have to see whether there's a counter coup that is mounted, for instance. Clearly, the chief of the army is an Erdogan ally. The extent to which the rest of the army supports this coup is still unclear.
Is that what you mean when you say he had neutralised the military, that he had, if you will, friends in the highest places?
Well, there have been cases against the generals. Some of them have gone to jail. This has been a very determined campaign by Erdogan from more than a decade ago to move against the army and to concentrate power in his office, first as prime minister and now as president.
Richard Barrett, we will move into your counter-terrorism expertise imminently, but as a security professional for many years, Turkey has had a history of fractiousness, but as we've just heard, not a recent history necessarily.
Well, it's a fairly fractious society, I think. There's quite a division between the sort of business classes, the middle classes and so on, and the sort of Anatolian inhabitants who are perhaps more pro-Erdogan and more inclined perhaps to more fundamentalist interpretation of Islam than the more urban areas. But I think whatever way you look at it, this last 24 hours have been a tremendous day for the Islamic State, so-called Islamic State. I mean, the attack in France, even if it wasn't a terrorist attack, and it's still, of course, not being claimed by anybody, has again raised everybody's fears that these attacks are going to become more and more frequent and harder to stop. And of course, Turkey had become, more recently anyway, one of the key enemies of the Islamic State and very much a target of the Islamic State. And whatever happens in Turkey now in the next days, it's going to be pretty chaotic.
I'm just receiving unconfirmed reports that military helicopters have opened fire on the state broadcast, and more on that if we confirm it further. You mentioned the attack in France last night, and as a counter-terrorism specialist, is there anything that a city or a country can do to guard better against that particular type of assault?
Well, of course, that's what everybody will be thinking about, you know, but there's a limit to what you can do, clearly, with this sort of weaponization of everyday life, like using a truck to kill people in such an attack. I mean, how do you protect against that? Having a public event like a fireworks display, you wouldn't want to prevent that, or a football match or anything else like that. And you can have a ring of steel around an event, but then it just pushes the target further away, and it's equally soft, of course, where it is. So I think that essentially people are going to have to get used to the fact that these sorts of things are going to go on, just as they have in the past, and they will in the future. Maybe this is an exceptional scale, and that can be limited, but the possibilities of other people like this man coming out of the woodwork and doing things like that, I'm afraid, is very real.
Really, why France? Why France so specifically and so frequently now?
I think there are several reasons. One is France has a very large Muslim community. It's the largest Muslim community in Europe. France also is very close to the Maghreb, and the connections with the Maghreb mean that people move in and out of France between lots of Tunisians, particularly in Nice, in fact. France has sent the largest number of Europeans to fight jihad with ISIS. And France has also been one of the most outspoken and the most active in the fight against ISIS. So I think there are various reasons that combine together. Some people say that also the very aggressive secularism in France is symbolically that it works to sort of turn ISIS supporters or people who are simply inspired by ISIS against the government and against others in France. And you have to remember that here we're talking about two parallel things that are happening. There are attacks that are directed in some cases by ISIS, and ISIS wants to lash out more now because it is under pressure. But the second phenomenon that's happening at the same time is the lone wolf phenomenon, and that is even more dangerous. So these are people that can be radicalized very quickly on the internet.
Many thanks, Rula Khalef, Richard Barrett, Mark Urban. Many thanks indeed. So, at the end of an extraordinary few weeks for domestic politics, the focus, it would seem, has shifted overseas, and events in Turkey will continue to unfold. Time now for a possibly welcome change of tone. Carla Lane redefined roles for women on television in the 1970s and 80s with comedies such as The Liver Birds, Butterflies and, of course, Bread. Tonight, Arts Night pays tribute to the writer who liked to describe her work as situation tragedy.